I'm Linda Barrett with the Fort Worth Public Library, and thank you for joining us on this chilly morning. Hopefully you are snug with something warm to drink in your mug. We don't have our usual promotional reel of upcoming library events, but please do take a minute to check out the calendar on the library's webpage. The address was on the slide before I started speaking. Or you can check out our Facebook page for upcoming events, such as next Saturday at 4 p.m. when it'll be If These Walls Could Talk, as archivist Jennifer Brancato shares information on how to research a house. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Leanna Schooley from TCU Center for Texas Studies.
Thank you, Linda, and good morning, everybody. We're so pleased you could join us. This is the Preserving Our Past workshop series. We are so pleased to have the generous support of the Summerfield G. Roberts Foundation and the Summerlee Foundation that allows us to bring speakers like Linda to us today. I have just a little bit of housekeeping. I want to remind you that you can always find out more about our programs, publications, and general Texas history events and research on either our Instagram or our Facebook, which is the Center for Texas Studies at TCU. And also, if you would like to receive our email blasts and you are not already on our list, you can send an email to me, and I will put my email address in the chat in just a moment. You can send a note to that address and we'll add you to the list. For today's program, we will have time for questions at the end, but you can submit questions at any time by just clicking the Q&A or the chat button at the bottom of your screen and submit those questions. And then at the end, Linda will address them on a first come, first served basis. Also, I want to mention that if you know someone who was not able to join us today but wanted to hear the program, or maybe you have to leave us a little early, the video, the recording of this presentation will be available on the library's YouTube channel, and we'll put that link in the chat for you as well. Now, I want to just quickly mention that our next program, when we're all in the throes of the post-holiday glee, will be January 9th, and it will be Gary Pinkerton, who will be discussing one of his books, which is Trammel Trace, The First Road to Texas from the North. So we'll be talking about early Texas history with Gary. So join us then on Saturday, January the 9th. So with that, I want to introduce our speaker today, who will be familiar to a lot of you who join us on a regular basis. Linda Barrett is a friend of the Center for Texas Studies and our regular partner on these programs. She is the manager of the Genealogy, Local History, and Archives Unit at the Public Library downtown. She's been with the library for 7 years. She has a Bachelor of Arts in History from Texas Women's University and a Master's in Library and Information Science from UNT. She's passionate about preserving information and helping people access it. She views her purpose as making connections between people and information to help them understand the world around them. And she really is the perfect speaker for our Preserving Our Past lecture series, because she really helps so many people do just that and learn how to be historians and researchers in their own hometown. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda to talk about urban planner James Toal. Linda?
Thank you, Leanna. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. I do have a couple of disclaimers. First, I want to say that I am by no means an expert on urban planning. My goal is to share how one person impacted so much of our city. And two, I just want to say that James Toal, though visionary and a gifted communicator, was not operating in a vacuum. None of this could have been possible without the proverbial village. So, pardon my lack of title there. Last year, I read Robert Caro's book, Working, and I was delighted by his description of his research processes while writing his biographies of Lyndon Baines Johnson and New York's Robert Moses. He relied heavily on interviews and archival research. I was surprised to learn how much Moses accomplished in New York without ever being elected to a position. His positions of power were always appointments, sometimes to positions created specifically for him. Reading about him opened my eyes to urban planning. It wasn't until I read Working that I truly understood how much of Fort Worth's history is held in the planning department records in our archives. As you drive around Fort Worth and go about your day, take a look around you and you will likely see several things that were impacted by the work of James Toal. Toal was born in Fort Worth on June 16, 1947. I noticed that Toal's aunt was married to the nephew of famed architect Marshall R. Sanguinet and had to wonder if this connection might have influenced James's interests as an adult. He grew up in Burleson and then attended Texas A&M, where he received a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture in 1969. After graduation, Toal was hired by the city of Fort Worth. He served as the city's liaison to the Streams and Valleys Commission for several years, too. In 1978, Toal earned a master's degree in liberal arts from SMU, and 4 years later, he earned a master's degree in public administration from TCU. Although Toal went to work for the city of Fort Worth as a landscape architect for the Park and Recreation Department in 1970, the first evidence I found of his work with the city is a June 29, 1972 Fort Worth Star-Telegram article that reports on a proposal that he and Bill Palmer, both city landscape architects, made to the Park and Recreation Board. The proposed plan would move the amusement rides then located at Forest Park to Trinity Park. The article states, among facilities envisioned in the new amusement area are new and better rides, food and souvenir concessions, duck pond improvements, free play areas with playground equipment, plantings for traffic control and screening of maintenance facilities, walkways and bicycle paths, miniature golf, boat rides, and roller and ice skating. Wouldn't that be fantastic? So many of these amenities were recommended in the report to the Streams and Valleys Committee on Lawrence Halpern and Associates Phase 2 of the Trinity River Planning Program in 1970. At the same meeting, the board also approved in concept a proposal from the Junior League that the organization and the Streams and Valleys Committee conduct a May Fest on May 5th and 6th, 1973. In an article the following day, Toal specified that with the proposed plan, the Forest Park miniature train would become more of a functional means of transportation, not just for pleasure. He credited the Halpern plan for the concept. I'm finding it rather interesting on this slide. It looks like we may have the coronavirus here on the tree. Back in 1973. So Lawrence Halpern and Associates conducted 3 major studies for Fort Worth and produced reports for each. The first, in 1969, was a study for a proposed north-southwest freeway. The next project announced that November was a plan for a small area of downtown. And then the third project was the Trinity River Planning Program in 1970. Each of these projects is significant to the work of James Toal, as will be demonstrated forthwith. The first of the 3 plans concerned a proposal for a route for a north-southwest freeway. The city's Sector 1 Planning Council submitted a plan, and Halpern's firm, Overview Corporation, was hired to make recommendations regarding the proposed route, which was from a point on Loop 820 between Bryant Irvin and Hewlin, and would cross the Trinity River southwest of Tanglewood Elementary School and run parallel to the river to connect with another proposed freeway that would parallel the present east-west freeway or Interstate 30. The next plan was for the Central Business District of downtown Fort Worth. One of its more daring features would be a pedestrian mall extending from the Tarrant County Convention Center northward to the Tarrant County Courthouse. Halpern and Associates criticized downtown Fort Worth as being inhospitable to pedestrians due to lack of shade, lack of water, and catering to cars rather than to people. The third and final plan devised by Halpern and Associates for Fort Worth was the plan for the Trinity River. This plan, although 50 years old now, appears to have influenced much of what has happened in Fort Worth regarding the Trinity River since it was introduced. In fact, it appears to have been so influential that it must be discussed in greater detail. The city of Fort Worth engaged Halpern and Associates of San Francisco to study and create a report on the development of the Trinity River in Fort Worth. At this point in time, there was still discussion of creating a navigable canal for barges on the Trinity River from North Texas to Houston. The Streams and Valleys Committee met at Amon Carter Museum to discuss a program to preserve and reclaim the natural ecology and aesthetics of the Trinity River Basin for public recreational use. Felix Warburg of Halpern and Associates participated and emphasized the need for public support. Warburg also said the firm would study usability, flooding, transit, movement patterns, recreational activity options, and visual, water, and noise and air pollution. Warburg noted that the primary source of pollution to the Trinity at the present time was water runoff, which passed through the stockyards and carried filth and debris from trash and garbage fills as well. He emphasized that awareness of the pollution was key to public buy-in on the plan. Among other things, the Halpern plan suggested placing fountains in the Trinity and an urban lake. That was 50 years ago that an urban lake for the Trinity was first proposed. This is a sketch of the fountains from the Halpern report. And this is an image. Some of you may recall the fountain that used to be in the Trinity just north of I-30, close to University. It's no longer there. So in 1973, Toal moved from the Park and Recreation Department to the Planning Department. By 1974, Toal was directing the 1976 bicentennial Trinity River Bluff project at Heritage Park. The park was proposed by the Streams and Valleys Committee in 1974, and would encompass the area north of the courthouse all the way west of the Jacksboro Highway. The project drew criticism for being too passive. Some were in favor of something similar to the Riverwalk in San Antonio, with restaurants and other businesses. However, Toal explained that a lack of sufficient space for parking prohibited that concept. Toal was involved in another major project in 1974 when the Federal Economic Development Administration granted the city of Fort Worth $75,000, which the city would match with $25,000 for renovation of the stockyards. This grant was in addition to $400,000 the city was to receive to fund wages for unemployed persons to work on the project, which the city would match with another $100,000. Toal reported that the funds would be spent on the Cowtown Coliseum and Marine Creek. So we've got a couple of photos of the work going on in the Coliseum. These are from some slides from the planning department. He described the work to be done as paint, restrooms, seats, floor, and electrical work at the Coliseum. And also, this is some more work they did on the Coliseum. They were doing roofing work and some caulking around the windows to make it more watertight. But also, Marine Creek would get walkways, native stone banks, and have check dams built to assure a permanent water supply. So this photo is of the creek back here behind the buildings up in the stockyards. And it's much nicer to look at today. So 3 months later, Toal and fellow city planner John Weaver gave a slide presentation to the Northern Area Council, which was one of 5 councils within the Chamber of Commerce, on the proposed work in the north side. Reading about this slide presentation was a pivotal moment for me because the city planning department over many years has transferred thousands of slides to the municipal archives, but they often came with very little context. It was obvious they had been used in planning and presenting projects, but without the context, we didn't know who created the slides nor who the presentations were made to. So reading about that in the Star Telegram was kind of a light bulb moment for me. In 1975, the Streams and Valleys Committee was working toward improving the aesthetics of the Trinity River in the Riverbend area and employing tactics suggested by Halpern and Associates for other parts of the river. They were looking to restore vegetation along the Riverbend area that had been destroyed during flood control work conducted in response to the historic, devastating 1949 flood. Texas Electric Services Company offered free trees to the city that were being removed during the construction of the Comanche Peak nuclear reactor site, but Toal declined, stating that the expense of labor, transportation, and equipment did not make economic sense. Instead, the city split the cost of purchasing the trees with the Sid W. Richardson Foundation. The tree project was part of a larger project to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary of the American Revolution. The trees selected for the project were of native varieties and were planted by employees of the Tarrant County Regional Water District, Tarrant County Water Control District Number 1, which owns the property. On August 5th, 1975, the Streams and Valleys Committee announced that Carter and Burgess had completed planning for Heritage Park and that the park would be completed in time for the 1976 bicentennial celebration. In April of 1976, Phyllis Tilley of the Streams and Valleys Commission announced that although the park would not be completed by July 4th after all, the celebration would amount to the dedicating of the beginning of the construction of the park. In September of 1975, Toal was working to plan 2 new parks in Fort Worth. One would be east of downtown Fort Worth. He informed a subcommittee of the state legislature that it would cost a minimum of $2 million to develop the proposed 400 to 800 acre Gateway Park into a multi-use recreational facility. The other park was to be a green belt extending from the Pecan Valley Golf Course to Loop 820. The plan for this park was created by the Trinity Greenbelt Committee, a group of private citizens interested in natural preservation, and at the time it was being discussed, it had not yet been reviewed by city planning staff. In June of 1976, Toal, along with State Representative Charles Evans and representatives from the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, met with members of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission regarding the proposed Gateway Park, now coming in at 800 to 1,000 acres. Later that year, Toal gave another of his slide presentations for the members of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission on a proposal to create a state park in East Fort Worth. He was joined by Chamber of Commerce President Ed Collett, Mayor Cliff Overcash, and other city employees. The park was to straddle Interstate 30 and connect Tandy Hills Park with land on the north side of the river. So in this slide, you can see there's a current map or a current image from Google Maps. And then this is actually one of the architect's renderings of what that park might look like. And you can see the old drive-in theater that was at 1931 Bomar Avenue on the south side of the freeway, the old toll plaza. And then at the very bottom of the slide or the image is Riverside Drive, and the diagonal road is Interstate 30, of course. So the city would provide the land and the state would develop and maintain the park. An urban state park was a novel concept at the time, and the ability to provide recreational opportunities to those who could not afford to travel, and this is during the 1970s oil crisis, was key to the proposal, according to Toal. Interestingly, the park would include the site of Fort Worth's first sewer treatment plant, the Riverside wastewater treatment plant, which would have to be demolished. And so that did not occur for many years, but also the state park did not come to fruition. And later in 1976, while Toal was working for the planning department, the Park Policy Committee debated whether or not a park policy should be developed prior to the adoption of a master park plan, which I thought that was kind of interesting, that they would create a park plan and then develop a park policy, or that they were debating that. But anyway, by February of 1977, James Toal was a senior planner for the city. In April of 1977, the city learned that the Federal Highway Administration was cutting $70,000 from a $217,000 grant for repairing and extending bike trails. The $70,000 had been earmarked for a 2-inch asphalt overlay on existing trails. Toal stated that despite the cut, if construction bids for the extension of the trail came in low enough, it would still be possible to make needed repairs. In August of that year, Toal told the Star-Telegram that the extension would take the trail to Loop 820, with a low-water bridge connecting it to the Overton Park Trail, and that some of the repair funds would be used to reconstruct underpasses under University Drive and Rogers Road. The next month, beyond improvement for golf courses, swimming pools, downtown area parks, the zoo, nature center, and botanic garden, the Park and Recreation Board estimated that it would cost $6.5 million to add needed new parks and enhancements to existing ones. However, Toal cautioned that the amount could triple as the board prepared to present proposals to the city council for consideration of a bond package for the election that December. The bond package would fund improvements to existing and construction of new parks. The improvements included tennis courts, trees, lighting, and paving of parking lots at 12 parks across the city. By this time, the concept of a state park on the east side of downtown seems to have devolved into a city park, with land acquisitions through repurposing the Riverside water treatment plant site, promised donations of land by foundations, city purchases of additional land, and use of an underpass to connect the new Gateway Park with the Tandy Hills Park under Interstate 20. By March of 1978, Toal was a senior planner in charge of urban design with the city of Fort Worth and working with the Park and Recreation Board on a project to complete the construction of Heritage Plaza Park, which was designed by Lawrence Halprin. $1,227,190 of private, federal, and city funding had built most of the park, but the Overlook Bridge needed an additional $185,000 allocation for completion. Toal told the Star-Telegram that if the city did not approve funding, that part of the park would be scrapped, although the foundation had already been poured. A few days later, the Star-Telegram published a full page of articles written by Streams and Valleys members Patsy Miller and Sandra Hawk, giving updates on several of the projects discussed above. A Park and Recreation Board package for $13.7 million passed on February 7, 1978, and it included funds for purchase of property near the Riverside water treatment plant for the creation of Gateway Park. And the authors of the articles mentioned that Lawrence Halprin had selected the name Gateway Park because it was a gateway to inner Fort Worth. Another article on the page reported that there were currently 17 miles of bicycle trails, but the city planning department was investigating lengthening the trail and a possible eventual link from Fort Worth to Dallas, and quoted Toal as saying that it would be logical for the trail to follow the Trinity River. The Streams and Valleys authors also provided an update on the program to retree the Trinity River, which by then had helped provide multiple years of between 500 and 1,000 trees planted. One of the best articles on that page covered Heritage Plaza and notes that Lawrence Halprin, nationally known landscape architect, used the bluffs behind the courthouse as a focal point and called them one of the city's greatest assets. It also provides insight to James Toal's philosophy. Toal saw the park as a way to bring people to the downtown area. He envisioned a historic trail system encompassing the courthouse and Pioneers Rest and Oakwood cemeteries. These important historical sites need to be interpreted for Fort Worth. We need to focus on all that history, he said. This is as good as a point as any to kind of digress into his interest in history and its preservation. Several of the projects that he was involved with after he left the city of Fort Worth involved restoring or repurposing historic properties. And also, he and his family lived in the historic Ryan Place neighborhood south of downtown. And his enthusiasm was evident in the weekly croquet games that he and his family and their neighbors held on their lawns, complete with attire from the appropriate era. A Ryan Place neighbor shared an anecdote about James working to prevent a historic architecturally significant structure on nearby Berry Street from being demolished after he no longer worked for the city. And Anne, you are so right. I think I have missed. No, actually, I didn't. In June of 1978, Toal presented a plan for parks along the Trinity River east of downtown. There was still hope for assistance from the state to provide tennis courts, baseball diamonds, overnight camping facilities, stables, and possibly a golf course. But Toal stated that the objectives of the city's plans were to preserve the gateway image for persons entering Fort Worth from the east, to continue to and tie the east side into the green belt formed by the Trinity, Forest, and Heritage Parks, and to provide open space and recreation areas for East Side residents. It is notable that along with the purchase of almost 300 acres, the plan called for the removal of 11 billboards from the north side of Interstate 30 to improve the aesthetics of the gateway. Toal cautioned a do-nothing policy on behalf of local government now could result in medium and long-range loss of environmental integrity of the river corridor. In the summer of 1978, George Heumann, director of the planning department, resigned from the city to take a position with the Fries and Nichols consulting firm. Toal, along with assistant directors of planning Joe Bellardi and Darrell No, were identified as potential replacements for Heumann. Later that summer, Bellardi was expected to be appointed to the director of the city's new development department, and Toal's colleague John Weaver was competing with him along with a pool of almost 40 other applicants for the position. As I conducted my research on Toal and the work he did with the city of Fort Worth, I observed that reporters seemed to interact with him a lot, and it occurred to me to wonder if perhaps one of his roles with the planning department was to act as a spokesperson. Then I found an article by Fort Worth Star-Telegram City Hall reporter Robert Mahoney that helped make sense of things. Mahoney stated that Toal was being recognized as perhaps the best presenter at City Hall, and quoted an unnamed city council member as saying, "He has the makings to become a good city manager. He has the ability to make complex issues more understandable and less complicated." Although Stephen Ondrejas was selected for director of planning, in January of 1979, assistant manager Gary Gwynn told a Star-Telegram reporter that James Toal was being considered for a new position in the park department that was the equivalent of being an assistant director, citing Toal's talent for giving presentations as noted previously. After some reorganization within the Park and Recreation Department, James Toal was appointed to the position of assistant director over planning and development of all bond finance park projects and parks funded by state and federal grants. He hoped the position would give him opportunities to develop administrative experience, the lack of which had held him back in his quest to become planning director. Toal stated that he was looking forward to an opportunity to move forward with the proposed Gateway Park, but noted that he did not appreciate his reputation as a staunch environmentalist, and clarified that he was interested in environment for all quality projects in which he was involved, and just wanted to make our stay on this earth a little more pleasant. In March of 1979, Toal reviewed the Halpern Plan and said, considering that it is a sketch, long-range plan, it's amazing how closely we followed it. At first, he said, I was scared to look at it after all this time, but we've done pretty well. 4 check dams had been constructed and another dam was improved on the Trinity. The water spout on the north side of Interstate 30 near University that was in the previous slide had been constructed, and success had been observed with a push to get business to focus on the river rather than away from it. More than 8,000 trees had been planted along the river, and the 112-acre Heritage Park was about 65% complete. Heritage Plaza, on the bluff on the north side of the courthouse, was under construction. The 7th Mayfest was being planned. A lagoon had been constructed across the river from the Tandy Center subway parking lot, and Toal said, long-range plans call for construction of a floating stage in the lagoon area for outdoor concerts, plays, and dances. A stair-step amphitheater, similar to the one on the Riverwalk in San Antonio, is being considered for the slope above and directly west of the lagoon area. Plans for Gateway Park were still up in the air in January of 1981. The city was still hoping the state would operate it as an urban state park. In addition to sports fields, picnic and play areas, the city's plan for the park included day camping sites and possibly overnight camp areas accessible only on foot and horse rentals and trails. The Star-Telegram reported that Toal said city park officials have even talked about running cattle or even buffalo in an area of the park that was to be between the Trinity River and Interstate 30, because a view of cattle or buffalo grazing just as travelers along I-30 enter downtown Fort Worth would be a treat. By the summer of 1982, Gateway Park was progressing, but a tract of land donated by the Amon Carter Foundation was hampering things, as it was currently leased to Material Control, a subsidiary of West Management Incorporated, which was operating a landfill on it. So the company was given 18 months to vacate the property, but the company operators were not certain that they could make that deadline because they would have to reclaim the 45 acres inside the park with new topsoil, terraces, and plantings. Toal indicated that construction of the park was not slated to begin for another year and a half, as the city planned to include application for matching funds from the state. Another project that began during Toal's tenure with the Park and Recreation Department was the Charles H. Paws Athletic Center, which offered handball, racquetball, basketball, volleyball, and table tennis when it opened in September of '92. And that is located just across the river from downtown off of Henderson Street, just on the east side of the street. Toal also represented the city in the public-private partnership with the Berkeley Place Neighborhood Association when the Forest Park entrance gates at Forest Park and Park Place were restored in 1979 and 1980. Heritage Park was completed in the spring of 1980. By July 4th of that year, Toal reported that 55 small lights used for illumination at night have been knocked out by vandals and would cost at least $5,000 to repair. In 1981, Toal was recruited back to the planning department. Stephen Ondrejas, who had landed the director of planning position Toal applied for earlier, left the city to work for a private firm, and city manager Robert Herchert appointed Toal acting director, but indicated that the intent was long-term. One of the most important projects Toal would be leading was an update of the sector plans that were created in the early 1970s. The sector plans were 20-year concepts for geographic chunks of the city, 11 of them including the Central Business District. In a June interview in 1981, Toal told Karen Hastings, "I'm 34 going on 40, in regard to his new position and responsibilities." Other major projects at that time included the Cultural District Master Plan and a transportation plan. A couple of months after becoming acting director of planning, Toal was interviewed by Larry Neal for the Star-Telegram. The resultant article provides insight into the challenges Toal faced and a good bit of his personality. Toal pointed out that part of the problem with the sector plans was that many people did not understand that the plans were part of a comprehensive plan for the city. He believed in designing a city to cope with its future from the bottom up, block by block, and neighborhood by neighborhood. Toal gave an example of poor planning, or none at all, in the near north and south sides of Fort Worth, where heavy industry existed next to low-density residential, where decay was gnawing at the neighborhoods. He said that involving neighborhood input was starting to change things and cited the improved thoroughfare system in the city as an example. Incidentally, one thing he described as an improvement was the removal of street parking on Rosedale, which has now returned in some parts of the near south side. The 1970 sector planning project was influenced by a mandate that required resident participation in the planning of projects in order to obtain federal dollars, and was likely also influenced by exposure to Lawrence Halprin's RSVP cycles philosophy that incorporated participatory groups in planning and design. Toal critiqued the 1970s sector planning project, saying that initially there was a high level of citizen participation, but eventually the participants were mainly housewives and middle managers, as executives and blue-collar workers did not have the time to participate. He felt this provided lopsided representation and was therefore not as effective as hoped. The article implies that Toal initiated the update of the plans in the early 1980s in an effort to resolve issues created by skewed public representation in the original plans. He noted that zoning was one of the most contentious elements of the plan and said, "What we were hoping to do in this plan is derive a product that recognizes the city as a dynamic kind of place where the markets are always changing and a person, when possible, needs some flexibility about how he can develop a piece of property," and noted that it's very important for everybody to realize the planning department acknowledges needs of developers. The city needs developers. In this article, one can sense the tension Toal felt as a planner serving the citizens, commercial interests, and the city. He even told Neil that he took 2 stress tabs daily. Although Toal's background was in landscape architecture, his work with the city of Fort Worth was not limited to parks. In October of 1975, he weighed in on a proposal for a multi-million-dollar development in downtown Fort Worth's west side of the Tarrant County Convention Center. The concept included a new central library and a downtown location for Tarrant County Junior College, a 400-room hotel, an office tower to consolidate state offices now scattered throughout the country across the county in lease space, and a variety of retail and restaurant establishments, all complemented by a series of parking garages and sky walkways adjoining the construction, and maybe even a farmer's market. Toal weighed in on the central library facility, saying that the library should be easily accessible to downtown transportation facilities, and that it would be of great educational benefit to downtown workers to have a TCJC college adjacent to the central library. Another benefit of the concept mentioned by Toal was greater use of the new water garden. And so this is the article where I had first encountered James Toal, was reading about his thoughts on having the library and the pedestrian mall. And that's where I started getting really interested in him. And suddenly, every time I turned around, I was running into something else that he was involved in. So the development was to be a pedestrian mall and transportation center, which Toal said would alleviate traffic and pedestrian congestion in the downtown area and revitalize the economy of the downtown business area. Unfortunately, voters did not support the bond issues behind the project. James Toal also worked on land use planning projects. On January 6, 1978, he and Teresa Day revealed the Meadowbrook Transportation Plan at a meeting of the East Fort Worth Business and Professional Association sponsored luncheon. It was felt that growth of the city's southeast side had stagnated due to Interstate 30, which was a toll road with few on and off ramps at that time. However, the toll collection period was ending on January 1st, 1978, which would allow for additional interchanges, so the plan presented included in the near term modification of the Handley-Eaterville, now Bridgewood interchange, realignment of the Brentwood Stair Road with Bridge Street, installation of a westbound entrance ramp at Blue Lake Drive and Bridge Street, and initiation of the design phase of a Loop 820 Interstate 30 interchange, as well as contribution of a study of Brentwood Stair Road from Eaterville Road to Oakland Boulevard, exit and on ramps at Cooks Lane, and widening the highway from the Toll Plaza to Sandy Lane. Toal explained that the city's strategy was to preserve the Trinity River Greenbelt corridor as an open buffer between continued residential development to the south of the river and expanded commercial development to the north. In the late fall of 1978, Toal presented a concept to the City Council for a study of Lake Worth to determine how the lake and its surrounding land can best serve the open space and recreational needs of residents of the northwest quadrant of the city. At the same time, the city hired Freese and Nichols to evaluate the spillway of the dam in the lake. On October 23, 1981, Toal was officially appointed director of the City of Fort Worth Planning Department. Also, in December of that year, the City Council approved almost $200,000 to fund a study of the city's cultural district. Friedberg and Associates of New York conducted the study, which suggested the following projects: new plaza entrance and landscaping at the Will Rogers Complex, additional parking, an outdoor skating rink, masonry and stonework repairs, restoration of the lighted panels and top and inside cleanup for the Will Rogers Memorial Tower, also known as Pioneer Tower, and conversion of the auditorium to a performing arts center, restructuring of Casa Mañana. They were talking about making it into a traditional theater layout rather than the theater in the round as it exists. Enlarged exhibit buildings and also Roundup Inn expansion. The Pioneer Tower, unfortunately, was not restored until last year. Also, in October of 1981, Toal discussed the potential for high-rise condominiums in Fort Worth. A 16-story pink granite project on Burton Hill Road had just been rejected by the Planning Commission on the grounds that it would be visually incompatible with the surrounding area, but other areas of the city were deemed fertile ground for such a project. Toal suggested that the area between University and Bailey, downtown, or the near north side would be appropriate locations, and indicated that Fort Worth citizenry was becoming more receptive to such projects due to exposure to them in other areas of the country. Also at the time, consultants were conducting a master plan study for downtown Fort Worth, and they predicted demand for up to 400 units of apartments or condominiums. During this same period, the Johnson, Johnson & Roy firm was presenting the findings of a study of the downtown area in which creation of a central business district organization to link business and city government in a working coalition was the first priority. And that central business district organization is what we now know of as Downtown Fort Worth, Inc. Other important considerations were access to downtown from the east, parking, and other street and traffic measures. In January of 1982, Toal reported to the Star-Telegram that the city's master plan was progressing and on track to be completed in late spring. He stated that each sector had unique hurdles, but that they had been identified and would be resolved in a few months. Each of the 11 sectors would submit a draft of their plan by late April, after which there would be an opportunity for additional public input prior to approval by the City Council. An example of a unique problem within a sector is that the parking in the central business district. The Johnson, Johnson, and Roy study mentioned earlier recommended that the city require 1.3 parking spaces be provided by developers for every 1,000 square feet of new building. Some of the city council members and sector planners agreed that the private sector should be part of the solution, not creating a problem that the city has to solve at taxpayer expense. It is interesting that the downtown parking issue appears to have been discussed in terms of real estate development and zoning, but the article does not mention transportation as a factor. The planning project was not an easy one. There was mixed response from the public participants in the planning process, as the city did not implement 100% of the plans. Some of the participants felt that the city ignored the plans. The plans were to be presented to members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then a 40-day formal review period would provide opportunity for additional public input. M. Alberta, a resident of the Samuels area, stated, "The staff pays us very little mind. I felt like they were using us. I believe the staff itself, more or less, is controlling the sector and planning of the sector because the things we suggested and we wanted, we never see in print." However, other residents said that the plan did reflect their interests. Star-Telegram journalist Rita B. Parson reported that Toal agreed that one of the problems of sector planning was getting balanced input. One way to improve balance would be for some council members to be appointed by the city council. Toal continued, less than 0.03% of the city's 385,000 citizens participated in the 1982 sector plan update. He believed that if city council members appointed members to the sector planning council, the former would be more responsive to the latter. In March of 1982, the planning department was hurriedly compiling an inventory of necessary transportation projects in hopes of obtaining funding from the state, as federal funds were dwindling and other large Texas cities would be in competition for the same funds. Toal noted that the inventory was an informal project and described it as being designed so that we can let the Highway Commission know that we will have some significant transportation problems if they don't fund us at a pretty high level. He cautioned that he did not want the inventory to get derailed by concerns over details of particular projects, as that could cause Fort Worth to lose out on funds, and the details could be resolved down the road. One project included was the Southwest Freeway, which had been tabled a decade earlier. While residents of Arlington Heights and supporters of the parks were opposed to the designated route of the road, residents and developers in Southwest Fort Worth were strongly in favor of it. The Southwest Freeway project remained stalled, but in June of 1983, Toal urged the city council to make a decision on it, saying, "The immediate problem that we have is development activity out there, and if we don't come up with something, we may lose the room," referring to the ability to reserve land for the freeway. However, opposition came from several quarters, and the council did not take action on the recommendation. One opponent of the proposal was a representative of an advisory committee that was charged with monitoring transportation planning in the southwest quadrant of the city, who stated that the committee was completely bypassed in the city's efforts. Toal confirmed that the city had not discussed the proposal with the committee prior to bringing it to the council. And although I am sure there are other incidents over the years, this seems to have been a turning point in which the conflicting responsibilities of Toal's position started to fray at the seams. I think it was a combination of the exponential growth of the city, along with funding issues. And as mentioned above, much of the resistance was coming from to the Southwest Freeway was coming from residents of Arlington Heights and park supporters. At a June 14, 1983 meeting of the Park and Recreation Advisory Board, Toal informed members that unlike Halpern's 1969 plan, the plans the city was considering at that point, the freeway would extend no further north than Loop 820, rather than continuing north of I-30 between Will Rogers Memorial Center and the Trinity Park. James Toal was known for his ability to simplify complex issues and present them in a concise, easily understandable way. In October of 1983, Star-Telegram reporter Jim Fuqua quoted Toal's commentary on his drawn representation of major thoroughfares in Fort Worth. Think of it as a wagon wheel with one of the spokes missing. The missing spoke is Southwest Fort Worth. By this point, the planned freeway was once again extending further north to downtown. Toal stated that he hoped the road would be in place in 6 to 8 years, which would have been late 1989 to 1991, and indicated that the city was considering funding it by operating it as a toll road. By November, the plan moved the transition into downtown further east between the Trinity River and the Holly Water Treatment Plant. In contrast to the information given to the Park and Recreation Advisory Board in June, by November of 1983, the plan was to curve the freeway through the north side to connect with Interstate 35 and Texas 121. Two possible routes were being considered, one between Nash Elementary School and Pioneers Rest Cemetery, or the other on the south side of Trail Driver Park. At this point, Toal stated that while it was possible the freeway would be a toll road, his preference was for the State Department of Highways and Public Transportation to fund it. At a conference of architects in November of 1982, Toal stated, "The city is rarely a leader. We do not have the credibility to be a leader. The business community does have the credibility." As you may recall, the plaza that was proposed earlier did not come to fruition until 2013, and that's the Sundance Square Plaza. And so that's one of the things that fascinated me as I've learned about James Toal, is things that I had expected to take a decade or so to bring into existence take multiple decades, sometimes more than 50 years. The sector plans became increasingly contentious. By December of 1982, the 11 sector planning councils had formed the Fort Worth Conference of Sectors and prepared to present two resolutions to the city council. The first resolution would bind the city to the sector plans, and the second would ensure that the sector councils would be involved in any deviations from the plans. The tension increased when the Wedgwood Sector Council not only did not support the resolutions, but considered removing their organization from the Conference of Sectors and sent a letter denouncing the resolutions, together with the resolutions, to City Planning Director James Toal, Mayor Bob Bolin, and all city council members and other city officials. The Wedgwood Sector Council was then accused of having been influenced by city officials and developers who do not want residents to have a continuing say in the growth of the city. Toal countered that the plan was used extensively, saying, "What happens is that a group will lose a zoning case, and so based on one or a few zoning cases out of hundreds, they say, well, they don't pay attention to the plan." In May of 1983, the city was working to get commitments from developers to provide land for the right-of-way for the Southwest Freeway from Hewlin Street to Sycamore School Road. Toal predicted that if the city was able to secure the right-of-way, the state would approve the project, and the city would request that construction begin in 6 years, which would be 1990. Toal's prediction was semi-accurate. By November of 1984, the Southwest Freeway was not on the state's 10-year plan due to a lack of definition, but instead was in a special projects category with a possibility that it would be moved onto the 10-year list at a later date. 8 years later, however, the freeway was still just a plan, languishing in the Transportation Commission's pending list. Toal said, "I think all of us were somewhat lulled into a feeling this freeway was going to occur back in 1984 and 85. In 1998, the freeway was being referred to as the Southwest Parkway, and it was still contentious. One camp demanded it to ease traffic problems, and another feared that it would contribute to the decline of the city's older core and increase urban sprawl. Construction on what is now the Chisholm Trail Parkway began in 2008, and the toll road opened on May 11, 2014. The toll road ends where it hits Interstate 30 near Vickery and University. So going back to the sector plans, the Arlington Heights plan was the last one to be submitted for initial review, and notable issues were traffic congestion. And however, Toal suggested that The sector was a role model for other areas in the city due to its varied composition, saying, "It has become a guiding light for other sectors. It shows that age doesn't necessarily mean deterioration." The plan was not without controversy, however, as sector representatives were opposed to the Southwest Freeway when it was being planned because of the potential to divide the Botanic Garden and the Cultural District. A year later, the plan for the Central Business District was the first to go to City Council for final approval. Downtown Fort Worth, Inc. would make the plans happen. The plan addressed 6 major issues: a predicted 4,000 space parking shortage, access to downtown and traffic problems within, lack of activity during evenings, poor pedestrian amenities, buildings with historical and/or architectural significance at risk of being demolished, and a lack of connection between downtown and open space along the Trinity River. Toal identified the real challenge was in teaching Fort Worth residents to use downtown. A study of parking in downtown to find solutions for the deficit was conducted as the Central Business District plan was being created. Toal predicted that downtown parking, already viewed as expensive, would become even more costly for commuters. The consultants recommended building a 2,400 space lot near the old Texas and Pacific Station. Due to the distance from the core areas of downtown where most commuters work, a shuttle would be necessary. A smaller yet important project that Toal worked on in the 1980s was the billboard ordinance. And I think that this is probably related to the work with Gateway Park and removing the 11 billboards along Interstate 30. So most of the things that I've talked about so far are things that we actually see as we drive and walk around the city. But this is actually something that we don't see. And, you think about it and, there used to be a lot of big, ugly billboards around and there aren't anymore. And this is why. In the spring of 1984, Toal worked to draft a billboard ordinance, which the City Council adopted in June. Under the ordinance, a Scenic Preservation Commission was to be appointed. Applications could be submitted for a public hearing to designate plots of land as scenic areas that should be free of billboards. Toal stated that the commission needed to be composed of citizen representatives that represent the values of our community, because that's what it's all about. Toal told the Star Telegram's Ann Reeks that he was not aware of any other cities with such a program. He said, "It's our way. I don't know if it will become the new way." But he explained that he didn't want to just do what other cities did with their sign ordinances. Another project in early 1984 involved the Cultural District. The city hired M. Paul Friedman and Partners and Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer Associates of New York to study the Cultural District and provide a report on recommendations for development and improvements to be made. In the report, consultants envisioned a district with well-defined entrances, outdoor cafes and pedestrian walkways, a large galleria, a multi-purpose corridor and display area linking the Will Rogers Coliseum and Auditorium, underground garages, a hotel, office buildings, green belts that would stretch to the Botanic Garden, and apartments and condominiums west of nearby Trinity Park. It was announced that in the summer, the City Council would hear a proposal for a special zoning district that would set design and landscaping standards for the district and entrance streets. However, although Toal helped get the ball rolling on this project, his involvement with it soon changed as City Manager Robert Herchert resigned from his position in October of 1984. James Toal applied for the position. He was one of the top 10 candidates, but was hampered by a lack of experience with running a large department, as well as his lack of financial management experience. It was noted that he had been discussing the post of Economic Development Director with the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce Chamber President Bill Shelton, but put that on hold when Herchert resigned. In March, Doug Harmon from Alexandria, Virginia, was selected for the position instead. Only a month later, Toal tendered his resignation with the city of Fort Worth. The Star Telegram announced that he would be starting a Fort Worth office for Frederick Brodsky. The first project Toal would be working on was the Parker Hogg School Complex, now Parker Commons. Brodsky and Toal formed a new company, TBA Development Company. They had a plan that retrospectively sounds like it was quite ambitious. Toal described a 5-phase plan. First, renovate the Parker Middle School for office space, then build a 20-story residential tower, build a 20-story office tower, renovate the former Hogg Elementary School building for office space, and finally convert the former Parker School gym into a health club. They expected to complete the project in 10 years. The $40 million multi-phase project didn't get off the ground due to the real estate collapse of 1986, but in April of 1995, Toal and Brodsky were selling the Parker School property to a developer who planned to turn it into housing, but that too fell through. In 1998, however, things were looking up for the project. The Hogg School was repurposed and renovated for office space, and the Parker School was renovated for apartments, and a new 4-story apartment building was built next door to the north. Now that Toal was working in the private sector, occasionally others would question whether a conflict of interest existed due to his knowledge of the city, its plans and projects, and his existing relationships with various people in and outside the city. In the late summer of 1986, Toal and Brodsky launched a new project between downtown and the Cultural District. This was an implementation of ideas Toal had as early as 1982 to bring residential and retail to surround the museums and theaters in the district. The 27-acre project was to be called Trinity Park Center and would be bounded by 7th Street, Foch, Trinity Park, and would extend 450 feet south of Lancaster. The name did not stick, and the project ended up being developed by UC Urban of Dallas in the early 2000s. One of the most entertaining things I learned while researching Toal's work was the saga of the silos. Situated in the middle of the Trinity Park Center site were grain elevators built by the E.G. Rawl Grain Company in the early 1900s and World War I era. The concrete silos were 110 feet tall and reinforced to withstand a grain dust explosion. On April 30th of 1989, the demolition company detonated explosives intending to bring the silos down. By May 3rd, 5 of the 19 silos were tilted 15 degrees. On May 9th, the first 5 silos finally fell. It was not until May 13th and over a ton of dynamite later that the silos were leveled. And the story even made it onto Johnny Carson's show, but he did say that these silos were located in Dallas. A few months later, Toal told Hollis Weiner, writing for the Star-Telegram, "I won't ever buy another grain elevator." Over the years working with Gideon Toal, James worked on several smaller yet iconic projects, as well as long-term master plans. In 1997, he was consultant to Phoenix Property Company on the Firestone apartment project, in which the historic Firestone Tire building was repurposed as a recreation center and leasing office. He noted that there were 3 benefits to the project: preservation of the building, the apartments would serve as a link between downtown and the Cultural District, and the city would not need to build streets or sewers to service the project because the area was already developed. In 2003, Toal was a consultant to Weber & Company, which had proposed to buy the Montgomery Ward site at 2600 West 7th to transform the main Ward's building into ground floor retail space, 2 stories of parking, and 5 levels of apartments. Toal said, "I cannot imagine a better solution. The building has been mostly vacant for 15 years, and the roof is about to collapse." So in early 1991, rumors were flying that the Pentagon might shut down Carswell Air Force Base, one factor being concern for the potential of a large aircraft to crash in a densely populated area. So the city of Fort Worth contracted with Toal as a consultant on the Southwest Freeway project. And then right after that, he was hired by the city also as a consultant to help convince the Pentagon to keep the base open, as it was a major piece of the city's economy. So eventually the plan was created to have the Joint Reserve Base. And so the base hospital was turned into the federal prison hospital. And then in April of 1992, I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch up because I know we're a little over time here. In April of 1992, Downtown Fort Worth, Inc. hired James Toal for up to 15 months of consultant service to develop a plan of action for downtown. He led the organization in conducting visioning sessions with almost 1,000 residents to generate ideas for a 10-year master plan being put together jointly with the City of Fort Worth and the Fort Worth Transportation Authority. Toal said that compared to previous master plans, this time there are many more issues involved than just land use, including addressing technological advances and transportation issues. The visioning sessions informed planners that the overall cleanliness, atmosphere, and Sundance Square topped the lists of what people liked about downtown. What they didn't like was parking, the lack of downtown retail shops, vacant buildings, and the street system. Respondents also said they would like to see the Trinity Bluff area developed, as well as more green space added to downtown. Although Fort Worth's need for a larger dedicated performing arts hall had been discussed for years, especially during cultural district planning, it was not until the visioning sessions that a downtown performance hall was seriously considered. That concept became reality with Bass Hall. The master plan for downtown identified 55 objectives. Toal said the city needs to help downtown capture the metropolitan visitor. To accomplish this, recommendations included an ultralight rail circulator system in downtown, potential redevelopment of Lancaster Avenue, a public market for local products, and an outlet mall that was to be in the old Tandy Center, as well as expanding educational facilities, which would involve establishing new public schools downtown. Another element of the plan was to establish a security presence in downtown. Downtown Fort Worth, Inc., hoping to change downtown from an 8-hour location to an 18-hour one, approved the final master plan, which would create 6 to 8 new areas of focus for the organization in late September of 1993. In addition to the previous strategies, the plan called for upgrading the Tandy subway, adding underground parking, and a central park and plaza. Although the subway was closed rather than upgraded, the plaza came to fruition with Sundance Plaza in 2013. Downtown Fort Worth got another boost in late January of 2002 when Radio Shack and Pier 1 Imports both announced that they were relocating their headquarters to the northwest portion of downtown. Toal was a consultant to both companies. The Star-Telegram also reported earlier in the month that there had been discussion of creating an urban lake by widening a 2-mile stretch of the Trinity on the northern and western edges of downtown that would be a potential recreation magnet for the tourists, boaters, joggers, and cyclists, while also encouraging waterfront development. In 1993, Toal joined the planning and architecture firm of Kirk Voigt Gist 4 years after Randy Gideon had joined it, and the firm became KVG Gideon Toal. In 1997, the firm was renamed Gideon Toal. So this brings us to one of the last major projects of Toal's career, the Trinity River Vision Project. In late July of 2003, the Fort Worth City Council authorized transferring money from the Fort Worth Local Development Corporation Fund to a trust to help bankroll $100,000 of an initial 12-month phase of the Trinity River Vision Master Plan. Tarrant Regional Water District, Streams and Valleys, and Tarrant County, which contributed the remaining $350,000 for the initial phase. The $450,000 would finance work such as designing an urban waterfront, developing a preliminary implementation strategy, creating a concept design, and developing a fundraising campaign for future project stages. This project, which is ongoing, was the catalyst for Trinity Uptown, now known as Panther Island, an 800-acre area north of downtown. The goal of the project was stated as to provide a vibrant, stimulating environment in which families can live, work, shop, play, and learn. The Streams and Valleys, City of Fort Worth, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Tarrant County hired Gideon Toal firm to guide the planning and implementation of Trinity Uptown. The firm was hired to do phasing, implementation, and funding strategies, and included establishing a tax increment funding district. Rather than going into greater depth on an ongoing project that many people have strong feelings about, I'm going to end here. I'm amazed by two things. One, that so much of what has happened in Fort Worth was driven or at least inspired by planning reports that were created 50 years ago. Fort Worth has brought in nationally recognized planners for 4 major projects. The Kessler Parks Plan in 1908, which gave us many of our wide boulevards with green medians. The Bartholomew Plan in the late 1920s. The ambitious Bruin Plan in the late 50s, which recommended a pedestrian-only downtown with subterranean tunnels for delivery trucks, and the plans of Lawrence Halpern circa 1970. Kessler's plan is still evident, and I don't know enough about the Bartholomew Plan to speak about it off the top of my head, but the Gruen Plan was obviously a no-go. But Halpern's plans, largely through projects that Toal worked on, are all around us. And that concludes my presentation, and we'll take questions now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Linda, I have a question about the records that you've drawn from.
Yes.
If somebody, I know that we're under a strange time right now, but if someone in the next week or two wanted to access some of these records, how would they do it? And who would they need to contact? Would they need to reach out to you?
Actually, they can call our unit's main number, which is 817-392-7740, and we will consult with them by phone or email to try and narrow down what they're needing. And then we can set up an appointment for them to come and view the items in person.
Good, okay.
And, Wendy asks, will this be saved somewhere to rewatch? Yes, it will be on the library's YouTube channel, and it usually takes about 7 to 10 days for them to be added. And we have a question, is Toal still active? Unfortunately, he passed away in 2013. And we have another question. What do you attribute the success that made James Toal successful in convincing others to realize his visions? I think that it was his communication style. I think that he, as you know, was mentioned a few times in the presentation, he was known for being able to take a complex topic and distill it down to something and make it very understandable. And I think that he was also very charismatic. So somebody else is asking, what do I think is his most significant contribution to our city? Man, that's a tough question. It's kind of like trying to choose which of your children you like the best. I think that it is his personality, the person he was. He was concerned with preserving the environment and also historic preservation. And I think that both of those things are very integral to the city of Fort Worth, especially having the river through it and having so many, we have a lot of historic assets in the city, and having someone like him working here and working for the city for so long was definitely to our benefit. So somebody else asks if the subway tunnels still exist for the Tandy Center. They still exist. They have been closed off. I think that happened in the late 1990s. I can't even remember when. There used to be a subterranean entrance into the central library on the lower level, and it was closed off at that point. And thank you, Anne. I appreciate it. So somebody else asks if I'm thinking about publishing a book that includes these stories. It has crossed my mind. Obviously, there is a lot of work to do on this. I know trying to present on these different planning projects in an orderly fashion was really challenging because it's almost like a spiral, because you hit something once and then it kind of dies down for a while and then it comes back a few years later, and so everything is kind of interwoven like fabric. So but I've considered it as a possible book project. And thank you, James. And thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Patrina.
Linda, we did have one other question I'm not sure we addressed, and that was if there is a finding aid available for the planning department papers.
So some of the planning department records have a finding aid. We have recently been receiving a lot of records from the planning department as they are moving around their location in City Hall. And so we do have a lot of content from them that we've just recently received and don't have a finding aid for yet. But, if somebody is looking for something in particular, just contact the staff and we will help you find it, because we've got pretty good ideas of what is where, even though there's not a finding aid for 100% of it.
I'm sure you have a very good idea at this point.
Yes. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate your attendance, and I'm sorry I've kept you a little over time today.
Linda, thank you so much. I know how much work went into this, and what a labor of love it has been, because I know you got really involved in it, and
Yes.
it's a really great story for all of us who are Fort Worth natives or newcomers too, to understand the background on almost the things we see almost on a daily basis.
Exactly. Yes.
It came about there. You solved some mysteries today, I bet, for some people.
Well, I hope so. I hope so.
Well, okay. Let me make sure we don't have any more questions here. I do want to share one comment in particular. We have a comment from Justin Toal, who is James's son, and he says he knows he speaks on behalf of the whole family in saying thank you, that Dad loved Fort Worth so much. Thank you, Justin, for joining us today, and maybe some other family members that are with us too. This is really just a part of Fort Worth history that will always be with us, and that's a remarkable thing. So thank you all for joining us. On behalf of Linda and I, we wish you a really terrific holiday season, and we will see you back in January. Thank you so much.